basically suggested to me that it was U.S. Special Forces that had set the worlds alight, not retreating Iraqi troops. And having made this observation, obviously word got out, and I was approached one night by, at dinner, by one of the U.S. officers. He obviously knew who I was. He walked straight over to me and he said, "You're Ian Crane, right?" And before I got a chance to answer, he said, "I've been hearing that you've been casting some aspersions about who set them worlds alight." And again, before I got a chance to answer, he said, "Boy," he said, "that's the kind of thinking and talking that can get you into a whole lot of trouble." And with that, he turned to walk away from me. And then he just looked over his shoulder and he said, "Ian, what the fuck's the matter? Aren't we paying you enough?" Well, you know, I've obviously told that story many times over the last decade. And people's first reaction is, why would the American forces set the worlds alight? Well, the answer is very, very simple. Because the Emir of Kuwait paid $7 billion to the American oil companies to put the wells out. And it's a classic example of create the problem, right? Create the problem, get the reaction, and then offer the solution. And, consequently, that's exactly what occurred. And it did take me until 2003 to finally absolutely corroborate that observation. And that was corroborated when I was in receipt of some correspondence from a guy who was a member of the Special Forces who told me that basically he had been part of the team tasked with setting the wells alight. Now, I was 34 at the time, Harun, and up until then, I had not had any reason to question the official orthodox version of reality. But that experience set in chain a whole series of events, if you like, which led me to be on the phone to you tonight.
Okay, wow. I mean, to be honest, many of us as a general public always questioned, what was going on, but, in Kuwait back then. And unfortunately, we get thrown into the conspiracy world, but, our gut instinct says something is amiss. So, I mean, it's quite interesting because that particular pattern that you experienced back in the first invasion of the Gulf, first Gulf War, was repeated again, secondly, and it's almost like, all these companies were all knocked out. I was actually talking to somebody early on today that all these companies were destroyed and then rebuilt, reconstructed by primarily American companies. Now, what we want to focus on really is what's happening today. First of all, I just want to make a bit of clarity about your definitions of certain words. What do you, when you talk about globalization and the global agenda, what is globalization in your mind?
Globalization, to me, I mean, it has multiple levels, and that's why, different people, depending on, one, where they operate, and two, where they think, that's why, I have to acknowledge that globalization will mean different things to different people. But ultimately, globalization is the quest by a very, very small group of people who actually believe themselves. They have a very unique belief system, and they believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. And so their objective, through this term that has been foisted upon the world as globalization, fundamentally it means a one-world government, i.e. theirs, a one-world economy managed by them, and a one-world religion, i.e. the one that they effectively dictate that everybody else shall believe. And anybody who really wants to look at the broad objectives of this group need look no further than the Georgia Guidestones. And they can Google this, Georgia, that's Georgia as in the state of Georgia in the US, Guidestones, whether one or two words. And these Guidestones, it's a massive henge that appeared on this hilltop in Georgia, in the southern state, in 1982. Now, it's attributed to an anonymous guy called R.C. Christian, and there's been a lot of speculation as to who R.C. Christian might or might not be. But they're literally spelled out in tablets of stone are the goals and objectives of those who believe themselves to be the rightful rulers of this planet. and they're in 12 modern languages and 12 ancient languages. And I'm not going to go through all the objectives because people can Google this. And in fact, I would absolutely encourage people to, as you did earlier, make notes or take note of some of the key things that I mentioned, because Harun, I do not expect anybody to take anything I say at face value. That is absolutely, not my point or my role.
Well, it'll go against the very work that you do, because this is exactly what you do: research and research and research.
So, all I'm trying to do is sow seeds and encourage people to take a look at things for themselves, because I absolutely work on the premise that you can never tell anybody the truth. People actually have to realize the truth for themselves, and they have to come to their own realization as to their perception of the truth. But here are the Georgia Guidestones, and number one on the list of these 10 goals and objectives is that the number of people on the planet should be reduced to 500 million. Now, Allegedly, there are about 7 billion people on the planet right now, so 500 million is a very, very significant reduction. And so globalization is literally about bringing into play policies and philosophies which will bring about the goals and objectives as spelled out in the Georgia Guidestones. Now, these guys think in very different timescales to that which we are taught to think. The vast majority of people actually think in very, very short timescales. Most people maybe think as far ahead as the next vacation they've booked. Some people will literally just be thinking as far as the next salary check. And some people will literally think just to the next edition of a soap opera or a sports event. So different people have different perspectives in terms of forward thinking, forward planning. But the vast majority of people certainly don't think beyond, let's say, the next year or two. Whereas these guys put together an agenda that is literally based on multi-generations. Part of my research is to look at what these guys are planning over the next 100 or 200 or even 500 years. Because that they're not interested in whether they achieve their objectives tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. They know they probably won't. But all they're interested in is to make a forward step. And they know that sometimes they take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But as long as they keep doing that, then as far as they're concerned, they're making progress on their agenda. And I know we're going to come back and talk about events that occurred to today, or yesterday, or a few days ago rather, in the Mediterranean. But, the vast majority of people don't appreciate that the ultimate goal of the Zionist agenda is the complete eradication of the Arabic population from Israel in the short term. And the short term for them is probably 50 to 100 years. In the longer term, their objective is to effectively eradicate the non-Jewish peoples from Greater Israel. And that, of course, is the area of land between the Nile and the Euphrates.
Wow.
So,
that's pretty heavy. That's pretty heavy stuff you're talking about. So, let's take one step back, because we've got in there pretty deeply.